Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Bob the Bookerer, and today I wanted to just look over some of the books I have been reading here in February. It's been a decent month actually for reading. I've had loads of books that I've been reading that I have just absolutely adored, which makes a nice break from January, which started with quite a few books in a row that I just didn't get on with. And so yeah, let's go through these. Apparently, according to Goodreads, I read 22 books this month, which again is quite a bit and fairly surprising. Especially as that takes me to a nice round 50 from the first 2 months of the year. But let's talk a little bit about them. Some of them were quite short, which is how I managed to get to that number. And let's go through them. So first up, I reread Atonement by Ian McEwan. I read this book, gosh, it couldn't have been that long after it came out. So I probably was too young for it in many ways. And it was one of my first books, I think, by Ian McEwan, and I absolutely loved it at the time. And as I'm finding out, well, as I found out from rereading it, I did not remember most of it. I thought I did. And it's really interesting looking back and realizing that the whole second part of the novel I had pretty much forgotten existed. Um, so if you've not read it, the story of Atonement is that it basically all starts with this very, very hot summer in the kind of the 1930s. You've got this family in this sort of rather large sort of house out in the country, and a few things happen that sort of set in motion loads of other things to come. So there is a couple, and they basically are kind of trying to find ways that they can, you know, sort of steal a moment to have a kiss or maybe to have sex or whatever. And they're, they're kind of in their sort of late teens around this time. And they are seen accidentally by this young girl, Bryony. Now, she is only kind of a young thing, about 11 or so, and she basically doesn't understand most of what she's seen. So when she sees them kissing or about to have sex in the library, she thinks that he's attacking her, for example. And, you know, she interprets all of his sort of clothing being, you know, her sister's clothing all being like up and whatever. She interprets that entirely as being an attack. She sees a letter that isn't meant for her, and it's basically the wrong letter as well. So it contains the C word, and she is completely horrified by this, and she passes this on, and it sets in motion this whole chain of events where her misunderstandings as a child really create, you know, terrible things for this man, because she essentially he essentially gets painted as a sexual criminal, as sort of being sex obsessed. He is sort of sent to this sort of ward. It tears up the relationship, it tears up the family, it creates so many other issues. I had forgotten just how good this book was. It was partly just, you know, after doing the 1998 Booker Prize list. Amsterdam by Ian McEwan is one of those books, and Guilty Feet, who you should check out, I'll pop his details in the just below. He commented, sort of talking about how Atonement was, you know, Ian McEwan's best, and that, you know, Amsterdam doesn't really compare. I love Amsterdam, but I am very much inclined to agree, in the sense that I had forgotten just how good Atonement is. There's such a tightness to the writing, especially that first half with, you know, it all being through the eyes of this girl, Bryony. It's so well done. It's so tense. It's so cleverly done. You both completely read it through the eyes of a precocious 11-year-old, and it feels kind of quite authentic in that sense. But you also do get the sense that there is a little bit of looking back and reevaluating. And in the second half of the book, we see them a fair bit, you know, in the future. So they're in the middle of the war. They are, you know, sort of a good few years older, and now it's time for atonement, for a kind of atoning for the sins of having lied about what she'd seen or having misunderstood everything, and the damage that that's caused. I love books a little bit like this as well, where characters look back and feel this sense of shame or regret or remorse, and they can't quite piece together what that looks like, and they can't make it right. And I think this book does it so well. I had forgotten just how brilliant this book is. And increasingly as well, I'm now confused, I think, why this never won a Booker Prize, but Amsterdam did. Don't get me wrong, I really love Amsterdam and do think it was the right choice for winning that Booker Prize. It just strikes me as weird, like 3 years later, that Ian McEwan writes a book far better, in my opinion, well, even better, in my opinion, and it doesn't do anything prize-wise. I mean, it got shortlisted. It almost won. But anyway, there we go. It's not all about Booker Prizes, somehow, shockingly. But yeah, that was my first book of this month, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really great listening to it as an audiobook again as well, just because it was so well done in terms of that creeping sense of dread and the sense of what the war created around it. It somehow works really well as an audiobook, hearing this sort of very clipped accent, but also kind of this slowly, this sort of descending sense of dread across the whole book. Brilliant book. Next up, I followed it with Sorrowland by River Solomon, and I read this as an advance copy. I think it should actually be out by now as well. So this is a book that I sort of requested as an advance reader copy on a bit of a whim in some ways, because I just thought it sounded quite interesting, and I am very glad that I did. So essentially it is the story of this young woman who is, for all intents and purposes, basically an albino, or she's sort of at least seen as that in the local community, and she's brought up in this very kind of closed-gated community, which is all it's all African American, and it's very much seen as being against the outside world. It's kind of a community formed against this outside world, of, you know, a black community against a kind of white America that isn't really for it, you know, and would persecute them at any given moment. And then what unfolds from it is just incredible. It sort of goes quite sort of sci-fi fantasy, which I'm told River Solomon, their other work is a lot more like that. And so this makes sense. I'd heard of the author but never read anything of theirs, and it's just really stunning because you've just got this character who just goes and essentially lives in the wilderness, and has to navigate nature and living in the world with her two sons, and fighting for them, and it's very sort of, you know, primal and connected to nature, and at the same time she's sort of on the run, she's sort of having to defend herself, and as the story goes on it just gets incredibly layered, and we get these really beautiful details about you know, the compound that she has escaped from. We get these really interesting takes on white America and the sort of failings of that. We get these really brilliant descriptions of love and sexuality. It has a lot of really kind of strong queer themes and relationships. And then you just got these absolutely beautiful passages where she just talks about this kind of virus that is running through her. And more as a result, I don't really want to spoil this, but more and more as a result is revealed about the compound that she has escaped from and the reason for that compound existing. I was really blown away by this. I just think this is a stunning piece of literature, and I really now want to go and check out a lot more of what they write, because I just think this is so kind of, it's brilliant. It's kind of so futuristic and forward-thinking and experimental in some ways as a novel, but also really does the main task of writing and characters and plot and everything else so well that it kind of, it's strange at times. It feels like a really amazing kind of standard fiction novel, and then it'll just take these amazing left turns which almost shouldn't work, but where things get so much more sort of sci-fi or spiritual or kind of otherworldly. I think this is done really well, and I'm very glad that as a result of kind of my whim, I picked up this book and was able to read it and enjoy it and love it as much as I did. Next, for a book club that I'm part of, I read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Oh, I've got this really nice sort of sparkly light effect kind of breaking through now. Oh, this is cool. I'm going to leave that there. It's kind of like a little disco ball in the corner. There we go. Anyway, so I read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. It's a book that I'd heard of. I don't think I've seen the film, or at least if I did, it was a very long time ago and I don't really remember it. And I have to admit, this wasn't fully for me. As a book, I can see a lot of the brilliance of it. It's very funny in parts. It's very twisted and dark, but essentially it is mostly a road trip of these characters who are just going through, driving through America, high on millions of different substances and drugs, and completely. This light is really getting wild. This is kind of, I don't know if it's working, if it's the same way for you. This feels really sepia right now. It's very strange. Anyway, and the book is just so absurd and silly and raucous. And so there are some really funny and really good parts. But I think ultimately, I don't know, I couldn't necessarily connect with the soul of it, if that makes sense. I didn't feel any kind of warmth towards any of the characters because pretty much all of them are terrible. And, you know, that's probably the point. But they are not always the nicest people. And that makes it quite tricky to really connect to it. But the next book I did read, connecting here, is The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey, which is full of heart and soul and love. So this is the story of a mermaid who is essentially fished up, and as a sort of part of it, there's this kind of link to a curse and this kind of really big story about who she is and what her role is, and she kind of keeps on trying to come back because this light is going crazy. Oh my gosh, what is going on? Anyway, and as a result, there's this really amazing sort of subplot of these kind of characters around her who, some of them want to sell her because they know they'll make loads of money. Some of them want to look after her. Some of them just want to sleep with her. And this mermaid just gets really tossed around as if she's a piece of meat for a lot of the story by so many of the characters, who either see her as just their way to riches and fame and fortune. Some people just see it as quick sexual gratification. And there's this really heartbreaking scene. It's really graphic and brutal quite early on when she's initially fished up. And this group of men are just sort of leering at her and commenting on her genitalia, basically, and talking about the various ways they want to screw her or essentially like molest her or assault her. It is grim in those parts, but I think that just saying that misses out on so much of the absolute beauty and joy in this book. As gripping and as brutal and as dark as it is in parts, there are also so many beautiful tender moments, an absolutely beautiful description of so many aspects of the lives around these characters, of the ocean, of, you know, of everything around them. I think this book is absolutely stunning. I now totally see why it won the Costa Book Award, and I'm really glad I read it. I listened to it as an audiobook as well, so what was kind of nice and special about that is the way it was read, because there are kind of music, there's a lot of musicality to the prose of this book, and the audiobook brings that out not only through the narration and through the accents and the dialects of the kind of area, but also it has a couple of specifically made musical pieces to kind of between chapters or between parts of the novel, and that was actually really quite special, I thought. There are some bits where, as it's being narrated, there's a bit of background music, and yeah, for me, I just think it's a really well done, beautiful book. And I am now seeing what all the fuss was about. I think, yeah, this is going to be a good one to kind of check out, and I'm really glad I read it. There we go. That's my expert opinion on all of this. There we go. I think I fixed the lighting problem for the moment by literally just balancing a mouse pad on the corner of my phone here as I'm recording so that it doesn't well, there we go, the things we do. As pretty as that was, it was getting quite distracting and I could barely see myself as I was filming. So anyway, there we go. Anyway, so after that, I read another advanced copy. This was kind of the period where I think I'd requested far too many advanced reader copies of books, and was sort of desperately trying to get through them just so I wouldn't accidentally bail on them and, you know, sort of do a disservice. But I am very glad that I did, because this next book, which is Dinner Party, A Tragedy by Sarah Gilmartin, I think is already an absolute front runner for one of my favourite books of this year. I've got a separate video coming out where I just talk about this book, but oh my goodness, I adored this. So the story is about a young woman, Kate, whose sister, we learn, her twin sister, Elaine, tragically died at quite a young age. And so every Halloween, because that was the day she died, they all get together, she and her brothers, and occasionally their mother, to mourn her sister's death and to just be together as a family. Long-time subscribers may know that I have a massive soft spot for family dramas, particularly ones with strong Irish lilts, and particularly ones that are done in this really tight, powerful voice. I adored this book. So I don't really even know where to begin in some ways. I mean, I do babble on about this for about 10 minutes in a separate video. But essentially this book, coming out in September or thereabouts, just has this really tight, almost suffocating feeling all the way throughout, because we start learning more and more about the backstory of this family. And one significant part of this is learning about the main character, Kate's anorexia. And that is a topic that obviously needs to be handled incredibly sensitively and incredibly carefully. And I really think Sarah Gilmartin does that. It's so well done. The beginning scene of the book, I mean, I was completely won over by it right from the beginning. But the beginning scene where we have this dinner and their mother isn't there, so it's just the brothers and then one of the brothers' partners, and Kate is making a baked Alaska, and has been working on it for a really long time, and you know, there's all this really strong structure, and we suddenly get this really strong perfectionist bent coming through the text. So there's something so tight and controlled about the language, and particularly about every description we get of this character. And then we suddenly learn essentially why. You know, she's such a perfectionist that she throws this baked Alaska that is basically ready to go in the bin, partly because she doesn't want the awkwardness of not eating it and kind of that becoming a thing, but also just because she's so sort of tightly wound and self-destructive, and yeah, this book is incredible. Essentially, I think this is, I'm almost annoyed that this book only comes out in September, because I really want everybody to be able to go and pick it up now. I'll probably, like, nearer the time when it comes out, I'll probably do a lot of rambling about how much I love it, but I just think this book is stunning. This is a debut novel as far as I'm aware, and it's just, there's so much character and voice and warmth and power behind the words that I'm really excited to see kind of what comes next from Sarah Gilmartin as an author. I just think we're looking at a brand new, very, very exciting literary talent here, and I feel incredibly privileged to be in the same timeline as this book coming out, because I just think this book is stunning. I also felt quite weirdly proud because I ended up accidentally being the first person to give it a rating on NetGalley, because I took it out and then suddenly realised, I was like, look, I've got too many advanced copies going, I just need to get through them. Started reading it, finished it in one day pretty much, and was so bowled away by it that I was just like, right, I'm going to write this review now, and then realised that I was accidentally the first. So that was quite nice to be able to award a book that I found stunning 5 stars straight away. You know, kind of get it started on a nice foot there. And I hope other people really love and appreciate this book when it comes out properly. I think it's well worth it. And speaking of which, another book that I had a really good sort of back-to-back moment here, because immediately after reading Dinner Party, A Tragedy by Sarah Gilmartin, I read The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. And there's already been so much buzz about this book anyway. I was a bit nervous that me rambling about how much I loved it, I was worried a bit more actually, I suppose, that I would read it and be like, oh, it was good, and not necessarily fully see the appeal. I loved it. Again, I've already sort of published a separate video just talking about this book. I would not be surprised if this goes on to kind of conquer most awards this year. I think it's that good. I think it has that much wide appeal as well. It's a really interesting thing that it does, because I should probably tell you the story. It's about two enslaved men in the Deep South in the US during the time of slavery, and these two men eke out this kind of love and relationship in amongst all of these horrible goings on. And I think where this book really sets itself apart, and makes it so special, and is just so special, is just the sheer amount of love that is represented through these characters. There are some really brilliantly set up moments where their love is tested, or where we are given foils for their characters with other people around the book. So we learn a lot about the other enslaved people working in the house. I say working, I mean, they are working, but they're enslaved. And it's really amazing because we get such a rich amount of focus about the inner lives of these characters, mixed in with this amazing look at spirituality and this idea of ancestors, mixed in with just so much power. And the writing is as well is so tight and brilliant. I was so happy. I read these two books, a dinner Party, A Tragedy, and The Prophets, back to one after the other, and was just like, the world is okay. 2021 has got some great books coming. This is fine. We're all good. So yeah, I was very happy with that indeed. And yeah, do check out my separate video on that if you want to know more about that. And same for Dinner Party, A Tragedy. I have a separate video just on that coming up. Next up were 3 books by Anne Tyler in a row, sort of spread out a little bit because they were audiobooks, so I was reading other things. I was cheating on them at the same time by reading some other books. But those 3 are Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, which is all about... actually, before I sort of say what that's about, like Anne Tyler in general, I hadn't really read all that much of. I'd read her 2 Booker, shortlisted and long-listed books. Redhead by the Side of the Road and A Spool of Blue Thread, and I liked them, but I didn't fully connect to them. And I knew that lots of people love Anne Tyler, and I kind of couldn't, like, I knew that there was something there, but I also couldn't quite understand what the mass appeal had been of Anne Tyler for a while. Guilty Feet, Daniel over at Guilty Feet, encouraged me to check out these 3 books, the ones that I'm about to talk about, and I'm very glad that he did, because they are brilliant, and I think also go to show a little bit more about why Anne Tyler is so beloved. Generally, Anne Tyler writes a lot, as far as I've seen, about sort of families, particularly quite close-knit communities and close-knit families, and I don't mean this to sound like a critique of them at all, but not much tends to happen. It's not these big dramatic plot twists or these big confessions of love, or people traveling halfway across the world, although that does occasionally happen. It's a lot of kind of very, a lot of conversations between characters, where characters are really kind of struggling with some kind of aspect of being in a family. So is that that they are the youngest who feels like they're not appreciated? Is it the oldest who feels that they're not appreciated? Is it a married couple who are sort of struggling to work out where they belong together? In all of those things. So Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant is largely focused around a family who are, kind of going their own ways and have their own little kind of trials and tribulations. And one of them has this restaurant, and there's this sort of idea with this restaurant of tradition, you know, kind of passing something down, and trying to sort of make the most of things. And this restaurant ends up sort of being the focus point that keeps on bringing characters back together. You know, like a restaurant in a hometown or whatever is often one of those places that, you know, if it's a family run place and it's been there for years and years, it's the kind of thing where when you go away, that's the place you come back to. Interestingly, actually, you know, in Sorrowland that I mentioned earlier, there is a restaurant that kind of serves a similar purpose. In The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, there's also another restaurant that has that kind of purpose. And I think particularly in a lot of US fiction, that's kind of you often get that kind of motif of this one family run business that, you know, has been serving this one community for a really long time, and kind of does it. I really enjoyed this book. I didn't love it as much as the next one I'm about to talk about, but I just found it very heartwarming and lovely. And the next one I read is perhaps I think it seems to be the one that most people rave about the most, which is The Accidental Tourist, in which a character called Macon, because I was listening to this as an audiobook, I was convinced this man was called Megan for like a good quarter of the book. And I thought maybe it was one of those names like Tracy, where it's, you know, technically a male and female name, whatever that means. But just that the male usage of the name is a lot rarer. But no, it turns out his name is Macon, like bacon, but with an M. And this is all about this one man who's a bit stuck in his ways, and he writes these travel guides called The Accidental Tourist, which is basically all for businessmen who find themselves in a city for 1 or 2 days. They don't really want to do anything touristy. They just want to know where the good breakfast places are and whatever else. He has a breakup right at the beginning of the book with his wife, and that kind of sets him off on this sort of thing, because essentially his son was killed at quite you know, in a sort of shooting, and that is sort of something quite that's not really reconcilable between the couple, and they really can't make peace with that, and so it drives their marriage apart. It destroys them in many ways, and so this is where, you know, him being kind of quite inflexible and being very routine and very almost too logical, right? Like he always wants to do the thing that saves the most time or the most money, even if it brings zero joy. And that's kind of that seems to be a bit of an Antyler motif. There's normally a man, normally from what I can tell, a man in this kind of role, but a bit of a stick in the mud. This is the same in Redhead at the Side of the Road, who is so sort of routine and almost cold in his approach that it drives everyone else around him balmy, because they can't deal with the fact that he functions like a machine. But this book is kind of really quite beautiful just for introducing these other characters who push him out of that comfort zone, and really get him to address, you know, the grief that he feels for his son that he hasn't really processed. And so I thought that was really beautiful, and really well done. And finally, from the Antyler trilogy that I read, is Breathing Lessons, which is again really beautiful, and is focused on a day in the life of this one woman, who just Maggie, for whom everything just goes wrong, and things keep on being late, or she, you know, right at the beginning she crashes her car, or damages it a bit, and everyone around her is sort of telling her how stupid she is, and she keeps on getting way too involved in everyone's lives, and in some ways that comes back to bite her, but in some ways we kind of still love her. I do want to do a sort of another video specifically just about books that all happen over the course of one day, because I think it's a really interesting thing when books do that, but I just think it's an absolutely beautiful little read. And again, I listened to it as an audiobook, and it's exactly the kind of book you want for a long walk, because it's just so peaceful and bucolic. I think that's the right use of the word. I don't know, maybe I've just said something insulting. It's very calm and mellow, and Tyler has a really great gift for capturing people's voices and characters and snippets of conversation and how people actually talk. So I just found this really, really beautiful and very much enjoyed it. So I'm going to pause those here because I'm very aware this video is going to get very long otherwise, because there are a lot of books here that I want to ramble about and talk about in great detail. So I'm going to do a second video just to sort of space this out a bit, just so you're not having to sit in front of your computer or tablet or whatever for an hour listening to me ramble. Instead, 2.5 hours of rambling. There we go. But I hope you enjoy these books. Feel free to leave down in the comments if you've got any others that you want me to check out based on these, or just that you've been really enjoying reading at the moment. And take care and enjoy your reading. Bye bye.